Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And in this video I'm going to be exploring some text mode style art again. This is a style that I tried several months ago, and it's something that I like to keep at from time to time. And so just to recap, text mode is a kind of broad category of art that's made by placing characters of a font together on a grid. Beyond just letters and numbers, these fonts often contain different sorts of shapes and patterns, so you're able to get pretty resourceful in making pieces of art out of them. Now, before I get into the actual tile editing, you can see here that I'm actually just working in Photoshop making some typical pixel art. This is a recreation of Quaxly from the new Pokemon game. And I'm working on a canvas size of 48 by 32 pixels. The reason I'm starting with pixel art and not just jumping into the actual font tile work is because I want to make sure there's a solid foundation for the artwork itself. In a second, I'll show you how to actually import a pixel art image like this into a tile editor. But for now, we can imagine that every pixel here is eventually going to be replaced with one of those font tiles. And those are often something like 8 by 8 pixels each. So the resolution and detail that's possible is going to become much greater. But I find even so, it's still nice to start with this underlying structure of this simplified pixel art appearance. So here's my finalized pixel art. Nothing special, but kind of just enough to provide a roadmap for the tiling step. To create the text mode art, I'm using this web tool called levellevel.com, which is what I used last time I tried this, and I found this to be really intuitive and really versatile. So we can go ahead and create a new project, and I'm going to change my dimensions to the 48 by 32, just like the pixel art, except in this case that's actually referring to the dimensions of the tile grid. And we can of course choose a tile set. The Commodore 64 is always a classic, but for this piece today I've been scoping out one from the Custom Sets tab that's called Rook. It seems to have lots of interesting building blocks for shapes, so I think it's going to be pretty friendly for this. And then for the color palette, you may have seen that I've been using a pre-made palette back in Photoshop. And that was this custom one here called Dots, which I thought looked quite nice, so we'll assign that one as well. Now, as I said, we're able to import that pixel art directly into the editor just to get us started. So I'm going to go up to Import and then click Image Video, and then select the file from my computer. Once it's imported, you can see that it's been upscaled to fulfill this new tile grid. And it's done a perfect job of expanding each tile, each pixel into that space, but we can see that there's kind of this strange artifacting going on where it's almost interpreted a bit of noise due to that upscaling and kind of assigned these random tile patterns to account for that. It looks interesting, I think, but I think we want to start from some clean solid blocks. So if we go back to the import settings, we can look for this one here called Color Reduction. And we're going to want to set that one to an option called Closest, which means it's going to force it into the closest color match to the defined palette. And it'll just use solid tones rather than these other patterns. So you can see now it's actually looking quite clean. Of course, one of the things I somehow overlooked about this palette was that it doesn't actually contain black. I was using that in Photoshop. And I really wanted that as sort of my background fill color. So I'm making a quick edit to the palette itself and swapping out one of the colors for black. All right, the first thing I want to do with the tiling is to smooth out all the edges of the pixel art appearance. So I've selected this tile that's kind of this 45-degree angle cut. And if we go through and just wedge that against all the corners, it's going to make things really angular and sort of smooth out this appearance. This actually reminds me of what happens when you put pixel art through one of those upscale algorithms. But what's nice in this case is that you're actually in control of the degree of doing this, yourself. And for me, this kind of appearance actually feels so characteristic of the text mode style itself. To be honest, this step is actually probably my favorite in the entire workflow. I mean, it's obviously fun to see the final image take shape, of course. But there's something that's uniquely satisfying about stringing all these corners together like this, and then also kind of feeling this immediate jump in resolution that happens right before your eyes. So one of the other characteristic or sort of restrictional items about this style of art is that the tiles are generally composed of only two colors. The way that I'm changing the colors here is just by assigning kind of a primary and secondary color using left click and right click. And that's why you always kind of see two of them selected from the color palette like that. If you wanted more sort of elaborate uses of kind of the tiling scheme, you could actually assign one of the colors as a transparency and then actually start to layer tiles on top of one another to create sort of combination effects. But in this case, I'm keeping things kind of simple, kind of restricted to just the 2 colors per tile approach. Even so, it's interesting to see the ways that you can blend different things together with only 2 colors at a time. Like there's ones that have just kind of like a narrow line of one of the colors, and that can be used to create a bit of extra outline or shadow or something. And then of course, the other one that's incredibly useful is the classic checkerboard dither pattern. And I often use that just to give kind of this transitional blend between 2 solid areas. One of the main reasons I selected this exact tile set was just the variety of these circular shapes here, which I could tell just from a glance would probably be useful in creating different kinds of Pokeballs. And I'm using those here to create kind of this decorative border for this entire piece. And this was of course a nod to the classic Game Boy look where they use this sort of motif for the text boxes. Now, this is really only my second text mode piece that I've done, so I'm still early on in just exploring different styles and applications of this art form. But one of the things that I've been enamored with is just this appearance of being a tad chaotic and kind of glitchy. Sort of how it's not necessarily going to be perfect when you slap different patterns and colors together. So what I'm doing here is that I'm just trying to introduce some more color to create a bit of a gradient, and also using them as additional colored lighting and highlights and stuff like that. This is one of those things that's super easy to get carried away with, so I'd say my strategy was actually just giving into that and going a bit too far with things, and then eventually I kind of pull it back to a more digestible level. One of the last bits of detail here was to add some text, some actual text mode text. I realized I could actually turn this entire piece of artwork into a sort of Pokedex entry kind of thing. So I'm adding some information that I just screenshotted directly from Pokemon Scarlet. These initial titles you can see I'm actually just kind of placing by hand, I suppose. But I realized after these that this editor actually has a text tool. And so if you use that one, it actually lets you just click on a starting tile and then you can kind of type whatever you want across the screen. And it pulls the actual lettering from the tile set that you have selected. And you can use Shift to do capital letters and everything. So this is a much easier way to get, long strings of text onto the page. And with that, we're getting to the end, so let's go ahead and take a look at the final artwork for text mode Quaxly. Here we go. Alright, so one of the finishing touches here was to sort of scatter this bit of lettering down, as if it's being washed away by that splash of water coming from Quaxly's hair. One of the other fun finishing touches we can do with the level editor is that it allows you to export with a CRT filter effect. And that one's really my favorite presentation of this style of artwork. Because this is born out of being a display font, I think it feels more in its element when there's some kind of screen effect like this. You can even fine-tune the parameters here for like color bleed and ghosting and stuff. So you end up with all sorts of like organic feeling coloration, and this just works so well for this style of art. And of course, we'll close out by piping that CRT appearance through an actual CRT display. So I hope you enjoyed seeing this come together, and thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.